Greg Hollis prided himself on vigilance. In the manicured lawns and trimmed hedges of Maple Ridge, safety was a part of identity. Well-kept houses, school carpool routines, neighborhood alerts about unusual activity. His daughter Lila, 7 years old with a mop of curls and a precocious curiosity, was his world. Her school recital, soccer practice, and bedtime were scheduled and protected. That afternoon, Greg was taking out recycling when he saw a dark delivery van pull slowly down his street, then stop near the house across from his. A man got out, tall, wearing the standard uniform of a national parcel company. Cap pulled low, Bluetooth earpiece in. He lingered, looking over at the Hollis house, as if gauging something. Greg's brain, primed by years of cautionary neighborhood Facebook posts about strange people, filled in the gaps. Packages were missing from the porch last week, Lila had been playing near the driveway earlier, and the man's nonchalant surveying of the block felt less like routine delivery and more like case study. He watched as the driver, Darius Bennett, walked back to his van, bent to retrieve what looked like a handheld scanner, then approached the Hollis mailbox with a small parcel. Greg stepped off the porch, phone already out, and dialed 911. The words came clipped, practiced. "There's a delivery truck here. I don't know the guy. He's been acting weird, looking around the neighborhood. I want someone to check him out. I have a young daughter at home." The dispatcher asked for a description and assured him patrol would be sent. Greg watched from the window as Darius, unaware, rang the doorbell of the neighbor's home, wrong address. Then politely stepped back, checked the label, and moved on. Greg felt that familiar tightening in his chest, the feeling of having done his part to protect, even as a tiny part of him, the quieter part, wondered if he'd overreacted. He justified it. Better safe than sorry. Darius finished his route on that block, his usual efficiency slowed by a lingering tension in the air. He had delivered packages on Maple Ridge Lane for months. Most houses knew him by name or by his daily wave. He was raising his teenage niece after his sister's sudden illness, juggling overtime and night shifts to keep the rent paid and her school tuition intact. He'd been up since dawn, the van smelling faintly of cardboard, coffee, and the mint gum he constantly chewed to stave off fatigue. When he saw a patrol car turn onto the street, he did what he always did, kept moving, scanned the next delivery, and kept his head down. He didn't know yet why the cruiser had pulled up behind him when he stopped to drop the last parcel at the Hollis' next-door neighbor's stoop. Officer Mark Benson rolled up slowly, his cruiser's lights off so as not to alarm the neighborhood, according to the department's new community policing memo. He approached Darius's van with a courtesy nod to the driver door. Darius opened his window mid-log entry. "Afternoon, officer. You need anything?" he asked, polite and practiced. His tone had a careful neutrality he'd cultivated over years of being observed in public spaces more than being simply seen. "Afternoon," Benson replied, eyes sliding over the uniform, the scanner, then to the street beyond. "We got a call about suspicious activity in the area. Mind if I ask what you're doing here?" "Delivery." There was an undertone, an unspoken, "Why are you in this neighborhood?" that Greg's 911 call had primed the system to ask. "Yeah, just finishing up on this block. That package is going to 124 Pine, Hollis's neighbor," Darius said, lifting the parcel so the officer could see the label. "Been doing this route for months. Is there an issue?" He kept his hands visible on the steering wheel, a tiny nonverbal signal he'd learned from watching too many viral videos. Benson leaned in slightly. "You're welcome to show me your manifest. I'm just following up. Residents reported someone looking around their property." He tapped the side of the van with a dismissive courtesy. "Can I see your ID and the company credentials?" Darius's posture didn't change. He handed over the ID from the clip on his belt, the company badge, and the handheld device that showed the time-stamped delivery schedule. "I'm on a timed route," he said. "You can call dispatch and confirm. Everything's logged." He unclipped his radio, letting it hang. "You can also ask those houses. Most of them know me out here. Mr. Hollis upstairs, he's given me a tip before when a package was left in the rain." The officer typed slowly into his laptop, glancing intermittently at Darius, and then through the windshield toward the Hollis home. "You sure you're not just casing houses?" Benson asked, the question loaded. "We've had a few porch thefts lately. People get creative." There was a reflexive skepticism, the kind that had been drilled in as protective awareness, but it skewed when the subject was a black man in a suburban setting. Darius exhaled softly, keeping calm. I deliver. I'm not the one taking packages. His voice was steady, but he felt the weight of the moment. It was familiar. If you need to verify, call the dispatch number on my log. I've got a 7-year-old at home who still thinks I'm a hero for bringing her a birthday package last week. He was referring to his niece. He didn't elaborate further. The humanization was quiet, intentional. Benson went through the motions, radio check-in, dispatch confirmation, which came back unremarkable. Darius's route matched. A cursory look at the van's contents, packages neatly stacked, none unmarked. Then a nod. All right, just be aware. If you're in a stranger's yard, people will call it in. He held the door open like a courtesy. Keep it moving. Darius closed the window, logged the check, and finished his delivery. He stood for a second on the neighbor's stoop, looked across at the Hollis house, and caught Greg's gaze through the living room window. Greg's posture rigid, a silent appraisal. There was a moment, something like a gulf, and Darius, without animus, lifted a slight hand in a brief professional nod before walking away. Greg retreated behind the curtain, uncomfortable. Something in him had softened, but not enough to undo what he'd done. Darius felt the familiar fatigue of having to prove simple presence. He swallowed it and kept working. 2 hours later, the quiet suburb was punctured. Lila, after a string of after-school crafts and a snack, had fallen asleep in the living room, with a blanket draped over her legs and a space heater humming near the bookshelf. Greg had gone out to the garage to tighten a loose hinge on the shed. He'd told Lila to stay put and had assumed the house was calm. The heater, old and slightly warped, had been making a faint electrical ticking she'd ignored. A loose wire sparked near the outlet behind the bookshelf. The flame was small at first, an ember on the edge of patience. Then it licked into the corner of the draped blanket. Smoke curled up, thickening, unnoticed because the television volume masked its faint crackle. Darius was 2 blocks away making a last-minute reroute due to a traffic delay when the smell hit him. Sharp, acrid, a deviation from the expected scent of suburban lawns and cut grass. It was the kind of smell he'd learned to trust from his volunteer days, helping on his cousin's construction sites. A warning. He slowed the van, peered down Maple Ridge Lane, and saw a faint gray drifting near the Hollis yard. He could have chalked it up to a neighbor burning fall leaves, a common practice in the season, but his gut, a muscle honed by years of reading small deviations from normal, tensed. He pulled into the Hollis driveway, parking in front of Greg's car in a block that had no sign-out formalities. He didn't think about the earlier police stop. He ran toward the house, the front door slightly ajar, Lila's habit to leave it open for air, and the smoke smell thickened, now sharp against his throat. He heard a faint rattle, the soft, disoriented breathing of a child in sleep, faint but present. Inside, flames had started to lace up the corner of the bookshelf, consuming the blanket and the fringe of a rug. The obvious exit, the front door, was already choking with smoke drifting in. The living room ceiling fan was throwing hot, stale air into the room. Darius didn't freeze. He sprinted in, the air burning his lungs, but he'd learned not to gasp, to take shallow breaths when smoke tried to steal oxygen. He dashed to the coffee table, grabbed the throw pillow and pressed it damply. He'd grabbed water from plant pot moments before, instinctive, over his mouth, and called out, "Lila, wake up! Get up! Come on!" The little girl stirred, coughing weakly, disoriented. Flames had crept closer, the cheap plastic edge of a speaker softening and dripping. Darius scooped her up, a slight lithe girl in her nightshirt, and turned toward the hall, but the smoke was denser there. He pivoted, bolted toward the window in the dining area, already cracked open for ventilation. He kicked the sill twice, dislodging the screen, and hauled Lila through. She was coughing, eyes watery, clinging to his neck. He dropped her gently onto the lawn just as the living room's small explosion of caught fabric popped with a muffled crack, sending embers into the darkening afternoon. Greg, hearing the distant shout from across the yard, ran up the driveway, heart in his throat. He saw Darius, blackened at the edges of his sleeves from smoke, hair damp with sweat, carrying his daughter away from the house as firefighters wailing sirens, summoned by a neighbor who'd smelled the fire, began to approach. The moment suspended. Greg's breath caught between guilt and disbelief. His daughter, wrapped in a towel, clung to Darius, small arms around his neck, crying quietly, not from pain, but from shock. "Daddy," Lila croaked, then looked up at Darius with huge eyes. He got me out." Firefighters detonated their practiced routine on arrival, choking up the drive with hoses unfurled, boots slamming, and orders crisp. Darius stood back, coughing, wiping soot from his cheek with the back of his hand. He watched as crews flowed into the house, smoke billowing from the front windows, now consumed in a sheet of heat-distorted air. A neighbor had already dialed 911 after seeing the smoke and the commotion. The dispatcher had a second call about a man who just ran in and saved the little girl. That version diffused through radio chatter, mixing with the earlier call's details. Greg rushed to his daughter, kneeling, hands trembling. "Lila, you're okay. You're okay," he repeated, voice fracturing, eyes flicking with raw confusion to Darius. You saved her." He didn't yet have words for the thing that earlier had been fear in his gut. Darius handed Lila into Greg's arms, with a calm that had been forged in far harsher nights than this. "Check her airway, make sure she's breathing regularly," Darius said quickly, stepping back so the firefighter-paramedic could examine her. He didn't ask for thanks. He only said, "Get her checked, man." Smoke inhalation doesn't always show now. She was inside too long. The lead firefighter, a large white woman named Captain Reyes, nodded sharply. "Good save. You get out before we got here." "Who are you?" "Delivery driver. I live 2 streets over," Darius replied, chest rising and falling in controlled, measured breaths. His eyes flicked to Greg. The man's face was a map of emotion. Greg's lips moved, perhaps an apology forming, perhaps a question. He couldn't decide which was appropriate. Lila, wrapped now in a thermal blanket, leaned into her father. The EMTs put a pulse oximeter on her finger. 98%. Her cough had slowed. Captain Reyes let out a breath. "She's going to be fine." "You did good," she said to Darius, looking him directly in the eye. "We'll want to debrief you as a witness." The fire was contained quickly. The cause, overloaded outlet and cheap space heater, too close to flammable material, was confirmed when the fire marshal arrived. The house would be damaged, but the structure would hold. The neighbors gathered, a murmur swelling, and somewhere a smartphone was already recording, the clip starting to spread down the block. The delivery driver in soot holding the little girl who'd been saved. The Suburban dad's face caught in mid-transition from suspicion to something else. Fire engines glowing blue-red behind them. Greg's hands trembled around his daughter. His jaw was tight. The town's small news outlet and several neighbors had already posted snippets. The earlier 911 call that had drawn a cruiser to Darius's route that day began to circulate. Someone had cross-referenced the suspicious report with the video of the rescue that had gone up on neighborhood social media, with comments layering in, "He was just doing his job, then saved a kid." Greg sat on the curb, Lila on his lap, the fire department's debriefers asking basic questions about smoke, timing, and how she was when he left her. He turned to Darius as the initial adrenaline bled into quiet shame. The man who had appeared in his yard moments earlier with a parcel now stood still a little smoky, and he had his own scraped knuckles from forcing the screen. Greg's voice was low. "I called the police on you today," he said. He didn't preface it. The words landed between them like a weight. "I saw you and I assumed He looked down at Lila, then back. "I can't tell you how sorry I am." "If you hadn't been there?" His throat tightened. "Thank you. I don't know what else to say." Darius shifted, wiping his hands on his pants. He had Lila's faint smell of smoke on him now, and the surrealness of being the hero in front of a man who had deemed him suspicious filled the moment with complicated texture. "She's okay," Darius said simply. "That's what matters," he added. "You didn't know. That's why people get scared. But you got her back." He didn't push the guilt, he let it sit. "Make sure the wiring gets checked. That heater? It's older than the kids' homework habits." Greg nodded, eyes wet. "I will. I'll fix it. And I want you to know—" He stopped, searching. "Would you let me do something? Coffee? I want to hear your name. I want our neighborhood to know it. Not as a rumor, but as the man who pulled her out." There was vulnerability there, the kind that comes when somebody's worldview cracks and the pieces reveal a simpler human fact. Someone saved his child. Darius hesitated a beat, then offered, "Name's Darius Bennett. I'll take that coffee. And if you want to help spread the word about getting old heaters checked, I've got some flyers I made for my niece's school safety project. You can start with the street." Greg accepted the card awkwardly, a gesture toward repair. The fire department had to process statements. The police officer who'd been on the earlier neighborhood patrol, Officer Benson, arrived, having been redirected by dispatch upon hearing about the rescue. He approached slowly, taking in the scene. The girl safe, the driver with soot, the dad white-knuckling his daughter. "Heard you were here," Benson said to Darius. He extended a hand, not a frisk, but a quiet nod. "Appreciate what you did. I'm sorry for the earlier stop. I should have handled it differently." The admission was terse but real, in a landscape where such things were rarer than they should be. Darius gave a small nod. "It's okay. People get scared. Happens. Today's different." The story spread fast. The local paper ran a piece. Delivery driver called suspicious, then became hero. Video clips went viral regionally. Neighbors who had once nodded in agreement with Greg's earlier caution now showed up at the Hollis lawn with casseroles, offering help with repair. The Townhouse Association president called a meeting, inviting Darius and Greg to speak, not as adversaries, but as a bridge example for the upcoming Neighborhood Safety and Bias Forum they were cobbling together after the incident exposed fissures. Greg, who had been on the defensive for years about keeping the suburbs safe, stood at that forum a week later, microphone in hand. He told the room, "I called the police on a neighbor, not because he was doing harm, but because I saw difference and let fear speak louder than facts. He saved my daughter. He didn't have to. That's on me. That's on all of us when we jump to conclusions." He turned toward Darius, who sat in the front row with a simple polo and a hat, and continued, "We're starting a free home safety check for older residents. Darius is helping me lead it. He's got the kind of real-world awareness we need. Not because he's a driver, because he's human." The neighborhood started a small safety campaign. Check your cords, know your neighbors, with Darius and Lila, now fully recovered, in the flyer photos. Police Chief Lorna Mitchell, a woman who had been pushing for departmental bias training in the county, used the incident in internal training, showing the sequence: suspicion, escalation, crisis, heroism, and accountability. Officer Benson was part of her new peer-led conversation groups. He spoke about how even well-intended vigilance can cause harm when it's unchecked by curiosity and humility. Darius, uncomfortable with accolades, used the attention to push for something else: a neighborhood grant to install updated smoke detectors for low-income families nearby, using some of the small charity funds that poured in from locals wanting to thank the hero. He declined a formal award ceremony, asking instead for a block barbecue where Greg and other families could mingle, talk about the earlier fears, and share food. The barbecue became a healing ritual, neighbors swapping stories, Darius quietly giving a short talk about safety and looking out for each other, Greg sitting beside him handing out grilled skewers with a laugh that had a new softness. Months later, the Hollis house had new wiring, a certified safety inspection sticker on the front door, and a photo of Lila and Darius, taken at the barbecue, framed in Greg's living room. The Maple Ridge Safety Initiative had a youth wing in the local elementary school, a started fund to help elderly residents replace old heaters and electrical cords, and a community app where people posted "Seen Someone Helpful Today" shoutouts. Darius still did his route. Kids waved when he passed. He and Greg had a standing Saturday morning coffee meetup at the local diner, where he'd occasionally drop a package off for Greg's mother, or help Greg carry groceries from the car, small acts that sealed a new trust. Greg had become an outspoken voice in the neighborhood about how to be aware without assuming guilt, citing the day he'd misjudged Darius as a turning point in how he taught Lila about people. He'd even started an informal mentorship group for suburban fathers, framing it around teaching our kids to see the person, not the uniform. The fire that almost claimed Lila became a footnote in the story of what transformed the street. At the following year's Community Safety Fair, a modest plaque was unveiled near the community center's entrance, in recognition of everyday courage and the power of seeing one another. Maple Ridge Community. Darius's name was on a small engraved line at the bottom, not as a hero, but credited as community partner. He shrugged when Greg nudged him. "You deserve more," Greg said. Darius just smiled. "We all do better when we don't assume the worst," he replied. Lila, older now and practicing fire drills with her school, would tell classmates that her delivery driver uncle was the one who saved her. And if anyone asked why the man came to their safety talks, she'd say with a grin, "He's the guy who taught Daddy not to be scared of nice people." The neighborhood had not forgotten the call that began the story, but they had layered it with the rescue, the apology, and the ongoing effort to keep their community safe together.